This is Rock of Truth Radio, the teaching voice of Rock of Truth Church. Before we begin, let us be clear. This broadcast is provided for educational and spiritual study only. It is not legal advice, it is not financial advice, it is not professional instruction. Each listener is responsible for studying their own state laws, court rules, local procedures, and for making their own decisions. A study manual has been provided to follow along with tonight's teaching. You can find it through the link in the description or at rockofTruthChurch.org. Go to radio, then law library, then study manuals, and select radio show number 1. Now tonight, we are not here for slogans, we are not here for internet myths, and we are not here to create conflict. We are here to study structure, rights, authority, procedure, conduct, and the record. So slow down, pay attention, follow along, because clarity removes confusion.
Struck the hour.
You're tuned in to Rock of Truth Radio, where we teach you how to think clearly so you can operate properly in this world. Close your eyes if you need to and listen. I am your radio host, Minister Joseph Anthony, coming to you live April 23rd, 2026 at 8 p.m. Eastern. I am broadcasting from an undisclosed spiritual sanctuary somewhere outside of Detroit, Michigan, and this is the teaching voice of Rock of Truth Church. Now tonight, we begin something new. We're stepping into a focused teaching series built on law, structure, and real understanding. We've tested the format, we've refined the delivery, and now we're moving forward, clean, direct, and structured. Because the truth is, most people have never been taught how the system actually works. They've heard opinions, they've watched short clips, they've been given fragments, but never the structure behind it. So that's what we're doing here. We're restoring clarity, we're teaching what rights actually are, we're teaching where government power actually comes from, and we're showing where those two meet in real-world situations. Traffic, debt, court process. Not a theory, but application. Because once you understand the structure, you stop reacting and you begin operating. That's the goal, from confusion to clarity, from reaction to understanding, and from there to proper conduct. And we're going to deal with this the right way, not through opinion, but through structure. So now that we've established that, we begin with the foundation. We begin with a simple but critical question. What are rights? Because if this is misunderstood, everything that follows will be misunderstood. And the truth is, most people have never been taught this clearly, so we establish it properly. Rights are not created by government, they do not come from statutes, they do not come from agencies, and they do not come from permission. Rights exist before government, they are inherent. Now, the Constitution does not create rights, it recognizes them. And just as important, it places limits on government power. That distinction matters, because if a person believes their rights come from government, then they will also believe those rights can be taken away by government. But when you understand that rights exist independently, you begin to see the structure clearly. Government is not the source of rights. Government is an entity of limited authority. Its powers are defined, delegated, and restricted, not assumed. Now understand this part clearly. Rights do not remove responsibility. How you carry yourself, how you act, how you respond matters, because your conduct affects how situations unfold. So this is where we begin. Not with reaction, not with assumption, but with understanding. because once you understand what rights are, you can begin to understand how they operate within a structured system. And that is what we move into next. Now that we understand what rights are, we move to the next question. Where does government get its power? Because just as important as knowing your rights is understanding the limits of authority. Government does not have unlimited power. It operates by delegated authority. That means its power is given, it is defined, and it is limited, not assumed. At the federal level, that power comes from the Constitution. If it is not given, it does not exist. Now, this is where the structure becomes important, because under the Constitution, powers that are not given to the federal government are reserved to the states. That is what is known as the 10th Amendment. And this is where states derive what is called police power. Police power allows the states to make rules for safety, for order, and for the use of public spaces. This includes things like traffic laws, driver's licenses, vehicle registration, and roadway safety. So when we talk about traffic stops, this is not outside the system. This is exactly where the system applies. We are operating within this area of law. Now understand this clearly. Just because government has authority does not mean it can do anything it wants. All authority has limits. It must follow the law. It must follow procedure, and it must remain within its defined structure. So now we have two things established. Rights exist, and government has power. The next step is understanding where those two meet, especially when you are operating on public roads. Now we bring this into the real world. Public roads. Public roads are not private space. They are controlled, maintained, and regulated by the state. And as we established earlier, states operate under delegated authority through what is known as police power. This is the category of law we are operating within. Because of that, the state sets rules for how those roads are used. Now let's make something very clear. Driving is a regulated activity, and once you step into that activity, you step into that structure that operates under police powers. It is not treated the same as simply existing or moving freely as a person. When you operate a motor vehicle on public roads, you are entering into a system that has rules, and those rules are not random. They are part of the state's authority to maintain order and ensure safety on shared roadways. That is why we have driver's licenses, vehicle registration, and traffic laws. These apply to anyone who chooses to drive on public roads. Now this is where many people become confused. They mix the idea of rights with the idea of regulated activity. But the law treats these differently, and that distinction matters. Because if you misunderstand the nature of public roads and the nature of driving, you will misunderstand how the system actually operates. So we will keep it simple. Public roads are regulated. Driving is regulated. And that is recognized in law within a structured system of delegated authority. Once you understand that, everything else begins to make sense. And that brings us to the next point, the right to travel and what that actually means. Now we address a concept that causes a lot of confusion, the right to travel. Let's begin with what is true. The right to travel is recognized. It means a person has the ability to move from place to place, including between states. That is a real principle. But now we need to be clear. That does not mean every method of movement is free from rules. This is where people misunderstand the law. So let's separate it clearly. Travel is movement, walking, riding, flying, taking a bus or train. That is travel. Now here's the difference. Driving is not just movement. Driving is the operation of a motor vehicle on public roads, and public roads are regulated by the state. That authority comes from police powers, which are reserved to the states under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. That is not theory. That is how the law is structured and how courts recognize it. So when you are driving, you are operating inside a regulated system. Now another point of confusion, the idea that only commercial driving can be regulated. That is incorrect. Commercial driving may carry additional regulations, but the act of driving itself on public roads is already subject to regulation. Whether a person is driving for business or for personal use, they are still operating under the state's authority to regulate public roadways. The classification may change, but the regulation does not disappear. So we keep it simple. Travel is movement, driving is a regulated activity, and when those two ideas are confused, people rely on arguments that do not hold up in real-world application or courts of law. So the goal here is not argument, it's clarity. Because once you understand the structure, you can begin to operate within it properly. And that leads us to how courts actually recognize this distinction in law. Now we need to slow this down and correct a major misunderstanding. There is a lot of information online about what people call the right to travel, and much of it is incorrect. What happens is this: people take small portions of court decisions, remove them from their full context, and then apply them in ways the courts themselves do not recognize. And that leads to confusion, bad arguments, and poor outcomes in real courts of law. So we're going to correct that here. Now let's begin with what is real. The United States Supreme Court has recognized a general right to travel. But we have to understand what that actually means as the courts define it, not as it's quoted online. In Saenz versus Roe, the court explained that the right to travel includes the right to enter and leave another state, the right to be treated as a visitor, and the right to be treated equally when becoming a resident. That is what the case says. It protects movement between states and equal treatment under the law, but it does not say that a person can operate a motor vehicle without following state requirements that are delegated under police powers. It does not remove licensing laws, and it does not remove registration, and it does not remove traffic rules. So when people attempt to use this case to support those ideas, they are misapplying the law. And this is the key point. The problem is not the law. The problem is how the law is being interpreted and applied. So we correct that here, not by opinion, but by reading the law, the way courts actually apply it. Now that we've corrected the misunderstanding, we step back and look at how the law actually works as a complete system. As we established earlier, states operate under police power, the authority to regulate for safety, order, and public use, and the Supreme Court has consistently recognized that authority. In Hendrick versus Maryland, the court upheld a state's authority to require registration of motor vehicles and to place reasonable conditions on their use. In Kane versus New Jersey, the court confirmed that states may regulate drivers using their roads, even those coming from other states. In Wrights versus Mealy, The court made it clear that operating a motor vehicle is not an absolute right, but an activity that can be regulated. Now that establishes a consistent principle. A person may have the ability to move, but operating a motor vehicle on public roads is a regulated activity under state authority. Now we also have to understand the limits on that authority. In Bell v. Burson, the court held that once a driver's license has been issued, it becomes an important interest that cannot be taken away without due process of law. This is critical for anyone doing pro se self-litigation. It means the state may regulate, but it must also follow proper procedure. So when we bring all this together, the framework becomes clear. A person may move freely. The state may regulate driving. A license carries legal protection, and the state must follow due process. There is no contradiction here, only a structure. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you understand that structure, you can begin to operate within it with clarity instead of confusion. Let's bring this lesson together clearly. What we've done here is remove confusion and replace it with structure. We've shown what rights are. We've shown where government power comes from. We've shown that public roads are regulated. We've clarified what the right to travel actually means. And we've walked through how courts apply these principles in real cases. Now here's the key takeaway. There is no conflict in the law. There is structure. The confusion only comes when ideas are taken out of context and applied incorrectly. But when you understand the full picture, everything begins to line up. A person may move freely. The state may regulate driving. A license carries legal protection, and the state must follow due process. Those are not contradictions. That is the system working as designed. Now understand this. Courts do not operate on opinion. They operate on structure, procedure, and established law. So if a person walks into any legal situation without understanding that structure, they will make mistakes. But when you understand how it works, you begin to move differently. You slow down, you think clearly, you act with purpose. And that is where this begins to change from confusion to clarity, from reaction to understanding, and from there to proper conduct. And that is the foundation for everything that follows. If this lesson resonated with you, continue your study with us. Join us each week for Rock of Truth Radio, Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, and on Sundays, join us for worship service at 11 a.m. Eastern, where we focus on the inward, the spiritual foundation behind everything we do. You can find more at rockoftruthchurch.org. Replays are available on YouTube, and be sure to sign up for the Rock of Truth Church newsletter to stay connected. Now here's where we're going next. We are building something very specific here, not just information, but formation. The inward, Christ consciousness, discipline, awareness, and the outward, structure, law, rights, and proper operation within the world you live in. Next week, we begin with a foundational piece, understanding how pressure works, how narrative is shaped, how accusation, emotion, and distraction can move people before law is ever applied. We'll be using a teaching drawn from an upcoming work on Roy Cohn, not for politics, but to study patterns. Because before you ever step into law, you must first master your response to pressure. From there, we will walk step by step into the Constitution, into the source of authority, into your rights within these systems, and then into application, contracts, negotiation, procedure, and how matters are actually handled before they ever reach a courtroom. This is not internet theory, this is not slogans, and this is not the confusion that's been circulating online. This is structure, record, rights, evidence, procedure, law. So take your time with this lesson, go back through it, understand it clearly, because if you can become steady within, you can operate properly without. This is your minister, Joseph Anthony, and this is Rock of Truth Radio. We'll see you next time.